Welcome everyone to the Creative Writing Panel event this afternoon as part of our Creative Careers Festival that started yesterday. A very warm welcome to our speakers today who have generously given us their time today. So as you can see that I've spotlighted on screen, we have Hilary Ivory from CanCanCreative. CanCan produce and manage creative content of many types, but for this afternoon we're going to focus on the writing elements of it. Hilary has ghostwritten many books, including cookbooks, and she's also worked with people like Paula Radcliffe. We also have Tess Little, who was a student, there you go, not that long ago, and now her debut novel, The Octopus, has been published in 2 hemispheres. And finally, we have Hazel Prior, and Percy, not forgetting Percy the cat, best-selling author of Call of the Penguins and other books with penguins, and also a harpist. So we're going to start with each speaker talking about their creative writing, how they came to be a writer, their process, and a couple of tips. And then prompted by questions, we'll have a panel discussion. And then we'll have time at the end, we'll have half an hour, so there'll be plenty of time for questions from the floor as well. So if we can kick off with the panel in that order. Hilary, you're okay to go first?
Okay, go for it.
Thank you. So if you want to give your little intro in terms of about your creative writing, how you became a writer, and your process.
Well, possibly strangely, I don't know about my 2 co-panelists. I didn't do English at all at university. I did psychology. So it was one of those weird things that you kind of fall into. You know, you can take a turn left in the road rather than right, and you end up going down a different direction. But I always had an instinct for it and a love of it. So I was a journalist from a very long time. I kept a journal, in other words. And that sort of starts you thinking about how you construct sentences. And I was a voracious reader. And I think that really is probably what clinched it for me. Reading, I mean, gosh, now my writing is informed by other people's writing, frankly. It's very difficult to come up with something entirely new and different because you're so influenced by the ghosts of, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants is very much how I feel. But anyway, then I just fell into cub reporter role. I moved to Cape Town, luckily, to cover the Mandela release. So it tells you how old I am, but it was a very, very fascinating time to be alive on the planet. And that sort of got me be noticed a bit. And I just did all sorts of other bits and pieces. You string it together as best you can when you're building your career. And then, of course, because the serious money is in marketing copywriting, and I know that's a form of prostitution, but unfortunately, when you suddenly have a child to feed, you needs must. So I fell into marketing copywriting, and that's basically where I earned enough money to give me the basis on which to do my own thing as well. Yeah. So I became eventually editorial director of publishing of a customer publishing company, and owned by a great big advertising giant. And then from there, I formed my own business with a partner. And then I started getting asked if I'd be prepared to do books. And it's eventually who you know, and you've really got to network assiduously, in whatever way is natural to you. But once your name gets out there and people know you're reliable, you can string a sentence together. You can possibly occasionally, if the wind is blowing in the right direction, be fairly original, and that you'll deliver clean copy. You've got a basic grasp of good grammar and you know how to break the rules. Then the work starts rolling in. Honestly, it's a thing. Your name suddenly gets handed out. It's extraordinary. So somebody gets asked to do a book, they can't do it, they're full up, it gets handed on to somebody, or they recommend somebody else, and that somebody else recommends me, and suddenly you're swamped. And it's a very, very motivational thing that I'm saying there for all the people who are listening. So that's it in a nutshell. That's where I am now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hilary. And we will ask you we'll probe you for more questions shortly once we get through all the intros. Tess, on to you.
So I mean, I similarly started out just as an absolute lover of reading. I used to just read constantly, and I guess I also just love storytelling in all of its different forms, whether that was, you know, film or conversational anecdotes or historical events. And I think that's kind of where my compulsion to tell stories came from, and also how I kind of found my voice as a writer too, by osmosis, just reading lots of different things. And I similarly didn't study English literature. I studied history at university. And I was always kind of secretly writing by myself until I studied history, a master's in history at Cambridge. And that was the first time I really pushed myself to try and find readers for the writing I'd been doing secretly. So I found out that the Maze Anthology was running a workshop, and I thought I would submit a short story to that. And I went along, and it was absolutely terrifying to have a group of strangers in a pub reading something I'd written critically. But with their feedback, I ended up revising it and then submitting it to the anthology, and it was published in the anthology. And that for me was the kind of first, you know, the first time I'd found any readers for my work. And that really boosted my confidence. And from there, I just kind of kept trying to find other opportunities. There was a lot of failure. I submitted to lots of short story competitions and had lots of rejection, which I think is something that all writers go through. But I stuck at it. I had some short stories published until I ended up publishing my novel. And all the while I was continuing to study history. And actually also similarly doing a little bit of journalism here and there. I think that's great training for any writer, to be kind of forced to make those deadlines. So that's my kind of writing pathway.
Brilliant, thank you, Tess. Hazel.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's interesting, isn't it? We all come from slightly different places. And for me, I did lots of other things before. I've always kind of written as a hobby, but I did lots of other things with my life first and didn't ever really consider that writing might be a possible future for me. So the main thing that I did was teaching English as a foreign language, but also lots of other jobs as well. And then I think the change came mainly because I was ill for many, many years and unable to function much at all. So I was unable to work for a great big long time. And then I was very lucky that I was whisked to surgery and fixed, pretty much fixed, and was suddenly kind of had my life back again. But of course, I've been out of work for a really, really long time. And it also kind of having had this experience made me think about, you know, how valuable life is and what did I really, really want to do. And the things that I'd really loved had always been the creative things. So music and writing were top of that list. So I started playing the harp again. That had kind of been left for years. And I started writing stories. And one of the reasons I kind of became a published writer was because somebody lent me a magazine, actually, which is Writing Magazine. So I'd recommend, my first tip is get Writing Magazine. So somebody lent me this magazine, and I saw there were competitions in it for short stories. So I thought, oh, I'll try and write a short story. So I wrote a short story the day of the deadline, sent it in, and it won that competition. So that, of course, made me think, oh, maybe I'm quite good at this. And the other big thing was that the first prize in the competition was a 3 weeks writing course at Swanwick Writers Summer School. So I ended up going there. So that's another tip, go to Swanwick Writers Summer School. It's a very friendly place and full of budding writers and full of inspiration. So I ended up there for a week and met lots of other writers, talked writing, absorbed writing, went to you have a choice of all sorts of different courses to go to. So I did that. And met some people who said, you know, this is really good that you've won this competition. You must try and take this further. So I did. So I obsessively entered short story competitions all that year, had some more luck with quite a few. And then I wrote the first 3 chapters of my novel, sent them off to a competition, was longlisted for that competition. And then they wanted the rest of the book. So I had to write the rest of the novel. And that's how I ended up with my first novel, which was later shortlisted and reached the top 5 in that competition. Didn't win, but reached the top 5. And then having got this book, of course, I wanted to get it published. So there was another long saga of getting agents, losing an agent, and then finally getting this deal with Penguin Random House. And I'm now on my 4th book. I've had 3 books published and I'm writing my 4th at the moment. That's it, really.
That's amazing. Thank you, Hazel. Thank you, everybody. And I guess success as a creative writer often boils down to obviously being talented at writing, but also an element of luck in finding a publisher, who's looking for your kind of contribution at the right time. What do you think made the difference when you were starting out in writing? If I go to Tess first of all.
I mean, I think that very first opportunity that I mentioned while I was at Cambridge was hugely important to me. I so desperately wanted to be a writer, but was also so scared of failure. And having never had anybody read anything I'd ever written before, I just had this secret fear that actually I was going to be a terrible writer. But having somebody interested in my work, I think, gave me a confidence boost, and that really pushed me to keep at it. So I think that opportunity in particular, and if I kind of widened that out to general advice, I mean, I was very fortunate that I had that opportunity at quite an early stage. But as a writer, you really just have to try and seek out those opportunities yourself and have a lot of determination, keep applying for things, keep putting yourself out there, even though it's incredibly scary at first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Hazel.
Yeah, I totally agree and second all of that. The persistence thing, I think, is the key thing that you need to have when you're submitting, because there is so much competition out there. It's ridiculous. So many people want to write. Having said that, a lot of them aren't that good. So, if you are quite good at what you do, you're already in the hopeful zone, but you will probably get rejections, quite a lot of them, because all authors do. It's just part of the course. So just go for it, keep going for it, don't be put off. And the other thing I'd say about the writing content itself, I think I was lucky that people noticed my book because it has an unusual voice. And I think the voice is quite important. So if you can grab somebody's attention by doing something a little bit different, then that will put you in good stead as well, because these people read so many submissions every single day. If you can have something that is just a little bit different from all the other submissions, they will notice it, and hopefully fall in love with it. So good luck.
I also have a quick question.
Absolutely.
I had a similar situation with Hazel, where I just had a life-saving surgery that gave me my brain back for the first time in years.
Wow.
And I used to have writing all the time. I used to write all the time and, win competitions and get really involved, but I feel like I'm kind of starting over. Do you have any other advice on where to find these places to submit to, or other programs that build confidence? Because I feel like I'm kind of starting from scratch. Because I mean, I had to partially learn how to read again over the summer, and I want to figure out how to get that process going.
Right, you've had a really, really hard time, and I would say be gentle with yourself. Don't push yourself too hard at the beginning. You've got the rest of your life still, and don't be discouraged. Small steps. I would say that attending language writing schools or writing courses is really good, because you get lots of inspiration from them, and you also get the moral support from other people. Have you actually got a novel that you'd like to publish, or short stories, or what sort of thing are you doing, can I ask?
I have short stories and poetry, but not quite a novel yet, but I have the ideas for one.
Right, well, that's wonderful. And I do think that being held back for all that time will give you further impetus to go forward, because it certainly worked for me. So please stick with it. With short stories, I do think, both of us have done competitions. Me and Tess both went the route of competitions, and I think that's a good one. If you get Writing Magazine, they list lots of competitions, and also Google writing competitions. That's a good way of stepping into it. And also there are literary magazines, sometimes they will accept things. If you write women's magazines type stories, you can also go for those. There's lots of women's magazines that publish things on people's friends and things, but obviously that's a very specific genre, so they will only accept a certain type of story. But those three things, I would say, would be the key way of stepping back into it.
Thank you so much.
I mean, I would add also just really quickly that in terms of confidence building and also improving as a writer and taking those first steps, one of the things that I found most helpful was sharing my work with friends and with other writers. And it was this very slow thing of forcing myself to talk about my writing with people I knew, and then eventually I worked out who else was working on their writing and tried to share our work and give each other feedback. And I think that's one way that you can improve as a writer and build some confidence in a kind of initial and kind of safer way. For me, that was really important.
Brilliant, thank you for that question, and both of you for your support and advice. A question for Hilary. What is the process of getting a publisher interested from a ghostwriter's perspective? Do you come on board with the person you're writing for, or are you commissioned by the publishing house? How does that process work?
Well, I mean, it's one of two ways. Sometimes it's a publisher who comes up with a great idea and then starts looking for a writer to match, with that subject. And the book I did for Paula Ratcliffe was a case in point. Now, she was the world marathon record holder for donkey's years. It's only just been broken, in fact, her world record. And Simon & Schuster had lined her up, but they needed somebody to write it because she's an athlete, very, very bright woman, but not a writer. And then somebody on their publishing team remembered that there was someone they remembered who both could write and also had run marathons and ultra marathons and could edit and was an all-round reliable. And that was me, and I got the job, and it was the most thrilling thing, honestly. I mean, I'd love to be writing my own novel like Tess and Hazel. I'm very jealous listening to you guys describing your experiences, but I thought, I'm going to get to write something and get paid for it. It was amazing. So I did that, and that was the way in. But sometimes since then, I've had individuals approach me saying, we've really got this amazing story to tell. We can't write it. Can you write it for us? And of course, you've got to have very long pockets to pay somebody, because as you will know, it's a slow process writing a book, and some people are slower than others. And if you're slowed down even further by having to to gather the input and all the material and assemble it and marshal it and, from somebody else, because it's very much their story, not yours, you don't own it. That slows you down even more. So it's a good year. So a year is quite a fast pace, actually, sometimes longer. So yeah, I've done a couple of those, but and so far I've had only really good experiences. I mean, I've heard horror stories of people who've signed up to be a ghostwriter for this person or that person and come away with, the welts are still slowly healing. they've gone off it completely for 2-3 years. And so I've not had any of that. It's been the most rewarding experience, but like Hazel and Tess, I'm itching to write my own now. So that's my next step.
You will.
And I guess it's always interesting how your sort of personal interest can sometimes kind of, help you in your career, like it did.
Well, that's the original career, and then the other thing was a means of getting there. The other two here are so lucky they got there, without having to go through the grind that I've had to go through.
A different routine. So a question to all of you: once you've written your book and sent the first draft off to the publishers, how much creative input do they have? Do they or can they influence plot, characters, structure, for example? So whoever wants to answer that can.
Shall I go first? I think they have quite a bit of influence. Well, judging by my own experience, my own editor has quite a bit of influence. When I write my story, I'll try and make it as good as I possibly can before I send it to my editor. And I think, she has nothing to do here. But of course, it's their job to change things and to improve things. And it can always be improved. And yeah, she comments on all those things, on the plot, the structure, and the characters. So it might be, I don't buy that this character would do this in this situation. Can you rethink this one? Or it might be, you've got a bit of a coincidence in here that isn't quite convincing, you need to change this. Or quite often it's something about pace, because pace is something that's very difficult to determine yourself, because you're writing at a certain rate and you go through things lots of times. So from the reader's point of view, sometimes bits will drag and you don't realize they're dragging, or sometimes you just have too much drama and too much stuff all happening at once and it needs to be paced out a bit more. So all those things they will help you with, and they will make suggestions. You don't have to follow everything that they say, but you're well advised to listen to them very carefully, because they are the experts. They've read an awful lot of books, critiqued an awful lot of books, and they know what they're talking about. So yes, I'm very, very grateful for my editors. They have improved all my books enormously.
Yeah, I mean, I would say exactly the same thing. I'm so grateful for the editors that I've worked with. One thing that I was quite surprised by when I went through the editing process for a novel for the first time, I mentioned I had come from a kind of journalistic sort of background, and especially in reporting, the editing there is very ruthless. You know, you'll have paragraphs just sliced away without any kind of apology or hesitation. Things will be moved around, and you'll be told you don't understand, you know, what the story is, and you've got it all wrong. And I was similarly expecting my fiction editor to kind of dictate to me what she wanted changed, but I found that it was a bit more of a conversational and collaborative process. And I recently reread the first editorial letter that she sent to me, and she actually very explicitly said this, that her notes were just intended to make me think, and that she wanted me to kind of, for them to spark other ideas. I could take which ones I found useful and discard the others. And often she framed her suggestions as questions. And even when she didn't, I thought of them in that way. So, you know, she might say, what if we had some food in this scene? You know, what if there was a meal here? Or what's this character's motivation in this scene? And then those questions would usually spark new ideas, so that then when I revised and resent her the manuscript, she was often quite surprised by the direction that I took her suggestions in. I mean, certainly it was a process that influenced big things like the plot and characters and structure, but I think overall it wasn't a kind of drastic change for me. In the novel, it's still very much the same story, but the main takeaway I have from the editing process is that the creative input wasn't necessarily just from her or just from me, but it was something that we created together in our kind of conversations and collaboration.
And it's quite different from my end, because of course it's not fiction, so it's based on fact, and my goodness, that's quite lucky actually. That makes it slightly easier, I think, because usually either I am the expert on the subject, you know, or the person for whom I'm ghostwriting they own their story. So yeah, that makes it much easier. So but I think mutual respect is really vital, and I agree completely that it's a collaborative process, and that when you form a good, strong dynamic, it's so rewarding. And I find I've learned things from, I mean, some of the editors, you know, these editors have been around for 30 years sometimes. I mean, they've really grown up in it, from, you know, from knee-high to a grasshopper. And my God, you know, you can really learn a hell of a lot from people like that, who are generous enough and constructive enough to share, you know, to really help you grow. So I can't put too high a value on that. That's probably been the single most biggest influence in my whole career, I would say. But the other thing I want to add is that from my personal perspective, what really gave me the knack of a tightly phrased, a tight sentence where 5 words work far better and more effectively than 15 or 25 was marketing copywriting. Although in the beginning, I described that as a form of prostitution, honestly. However, my God, it's a discipline, and you learn concision, you know, so that floweriness goes out the window, because nobody can possibly do that. I remember Faye Weldon, I don't even know if Faye Weldon's alive yet, horrified to say, but she was an advertising copywriter for years, and she said that's the one thing that got her writing pin sharp, was having that discipline of having to write very succinctly and be bang on brief and communicate every single element that needs to be communicated. Wow.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, you've also kind of touched on a little bit your relationship with your editors. How do you have anything else that you could to add around the relationship? You know, how important that relationship with your editor is?
It's very important that you have the mutual trust, because it, you know, writing is a very personal thing, and of course you are very precious about your own book, and you have to learn to have a thick skin, because when you get your edits back, it is a bit like having suddenly 200 criticisms of your baby. So you really need to have that respect for your editor, and you can go away and cry and then come back to it and think about it and give it some distance, and don't immediately try not to have too much of a knee-jerk reaction. But yes, I mean, I've been very lucky. I've had a couple of editors, because they do tend to get promoted or move to a different publisher or take pregnancy leave, and that can be upsetting as well. As soon as you've kind of built up this very important relationship, then they're off. But it's all part of the dramas of the writing life. It's never steady. It's always ups and downs all the way, I've found.
But also they can, I'll lose the thread. When they do move on to other publishers, it's brilliant, because they often take you with them.
That can happen,
yeah. I mean, I would agree that in terms of the editing process, you really want to sell your manuscript to somebody who understands what you're trying to do with your work. But another thing I would add as well is that I didn't quite fully understand before selling my first novel, is that the relationship with the editor and the editor themselves are so crucial in terms of getting the book into readers' hands. So your editor is going to be your in-house champion within the publishing house. So when you send your manuscript to an editor and they like it, they actually have to convince everyone in their publishing house that it's worth buying, that it's worth spending money on, and especially the people who control the purse strings in the publishing house. And then they're also the one liaising with the art department and marketing and publicity. They're going to be the one fighting for marketing budgets, advocating for other people in the publishing house to spend their time and their energy working on this project. And then also they're an important champion kind of outside of the publishing house too. So they'll be the person submitting it to writing awards and sending it to authors to try and get blurb quotes. So really, I think for a book to be a success, it needs an editor who understands the writing, but also just has the enthusiasm and the passion to really try and get that writing to readers and into their hands.
Yeah.
Thank you all. So a bit of maybe slightly personal, but quite a key question here. Can you make a living as a creative writer of books? And what else do you do alongside that still leaves you enough time to be writing?
Should I go first? I would just say that it's extremely hard to make a living out of writing, as I'm sure my co-panelists will attest. And I was thinking of Andrew Morton in the ghostwriting genre, who famously wrote all those royal biographies like Diana and the Windsors and, oh God, the Windsors and Nazism. And I think there's one out on Meghan. Anyway, that's what he does. I mean, I read that he wrote Diana in 1992 and he made £1 million in 1992 on the back of that one book. But that is extraordinarily rare. It's just incredible. And how he managed to get access to her is another thing. I mean, if you can pull off a book like that, then you're honestly, really, you're made. That'll always be that'll underpin everything else you do. So I would say it's very, very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. In ghostwriting terms, you can expect to make between 10 and 20,000 for a book, but a book can take you it could be way longer than a year. You've got to stack it all up. You've got to have several things running, like Boeing's stacked over Tower Bridge coming into land at Heathrow. You've got to have lots of things on the go and juggle. And in my case, I do copywriting as well. So that's the kind of fast, quick turnaround stuff. Then the book on a much longer deadline kind of, bumps along the bottom, eventually gets handed in when the publisher shouts loudly enough. So I would say it's tricky, so be realistic, and it's worth it though. My God, if you've got to pull pints in a pub or wait on tables, who cares? If you're young, do it. Just create the space for writing. Don't hold back. If that's what you want to do, follow your passion.
Definitely. And I'd just like to say that I am living proof that you can earn a living from writing, because I do. I don't do anything else that earns me money. I play the harp, but that is the one that it earns really pants money. There's hardly anything from that. It's the writing that now allows me to, live in a house and put food on the table and also support my husband. I know I am the exception, and that's partly because I have a very, very good agent who has negotiated some fantastic deals for me, and also foreign deals. So my books are now also translated into I think it's 18 different languages now. And that makes a big difference, and little bits of money keep coming in all over the place, but also because I was very lucky that Rich and Judy picked my second book for their book club read, and that made a huge difference. So little boosters like this, suddenly the money goes up, whoosh. So it can happen, and you can be very lucky, and I'm definitely in the lucky category there. It definitely is possible. Unusual, but possible.
I thought I would look up some figures in preparation for this panel, and I found that a 2020 survey carried out by the University of Glasgow, which had tracked author earnings over the past 15 years, found that just 13.7% of authors earn their income solely from writing nowadays. So it really, really is an exception to just make your money through the writing alone. And I would say that nowadays most authors have kind of portfolio careers where they combine writing books with other forms of income. And that could include, teaching, either as creative writing academics or maybe on short-term writing courses, residencies. It could include other forms of writing, so journalism or writing copy, or even some kind of other storytelling forms. So I know some writers who do kind of gaming narratives and comic narratives as well. And often writers will kind of support themselves through a combination of these. So that's the kind of portfolio, or they will have another job entirely, whether that's, being I know some writers who are foreign language tutors or bartenders. And I think really the key question for me is about balance. So it's about the stability of your income versus the flexibility, because as my other panelists have mentioned, you do need to have the kind of time to write and edit and publicize your writing. And I think a key question also is whether you're monetizing your writing skills. These are the skills that you have, and it might be worth monetizing them, but at the same time, they're going to be using up the same energy and kind of mental reserves as doing your creative writing. And so that might be something that you want to balance as well. I wrote my first novel while I was doing my PhD in history, which meant that I had more flexibility, but it was also incredibly exhausting, juggling two long-term projects that used very similar skills. So those, for me, are the questions that you've just got to weigh up constantly as a writer.
Thank you very much. Some excellent perspectives there. Thank you for putting up those stats, Tess. That was really interesting. I wanted to ask about postgraduate courses in creative writing. And Hazel, obviously, I know you did that course, and Tess, you've obviously done your master's and PhD. But would either of you recommend anyone doing a postgraduate course in creative writing?
I mean, you certainly don't need a creative writing degree to become a published writer. And I didn't have a degree in creative writing when I published my first novel, but I am actually currently enrolled on the MA in prose fiction at UEA, and that's what I'm doing this year. So I can probably kind of speak to this question. I think for me, I decided to pursue it for a few different reasons. I think the first one, because I'd studied history before and not English literature, I felt that although I had done a lot of writing before, I wasn't a kind of conscious writer. I felt that I still had a lot to learn in terms of dissecting and discussing texts, understanding character and structure and all those building blocks of fiction. And really, actually, it was the process of publishing my first novel that made me realize I still had a lot to learn, because I was discussing all of these things with my editor, or, whether it was in kind of media appearances. And I realized that I couldn't quite articulate what I'd been doing. I also thought it would be a good idea to do a creative writing degree because I wanted to become part of a writing community. I published my novel during the pandemic, so I think I missed out on lots of opportunities to meet other writers. And I really wanted to learn from other writers, develop relationships with them and talk about their work and learn how to critique each other's drafts. I wanted the time and the space to focus on my writing for a year. It's a very intensive year of just reading and writing and editing. And also, finally, I think you do almost always need a degree in creative writing to be able to teach creative writing, certainly at a university level. And that was a kind of career pathway that I was and still am quite interested in. So that was the fourth reason. But it is, I think, a very personal thing whether you decide to do a degree in creative writing or not. I mean, they're incredibly expensive, and no creative writing degree is going to promise that they'll get you publishing opportunities at the end of it, but they do introduce you to agents, so it can help you get your foot in the door. I think for me, it's just, you know, a year of just being able to focus on writing. I've already found after one term that I've improved so much.
I mean, Hazel's idea of just doing courses is a very good one, I think. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to do a postgrad or even an undergrad creative writing degree, because it's a craft, as we all know. Writing is a craft, and you hone it over, you know, with practice and exposure to other people's good writing. But I think even if you come into some kind of legacy from a great aunt and you think, I think I might go and, you know, do a creative writing course in Devon or Scotland or something. Well, why not? You know, why not? Especially if the lecturers are going to be really brilliant, or the tutors really brilliant, and you know, they can be uplifting and you come away inspired. So that's my view.
Yes, I've come across a few people who've done these courses, and I'm kind of divided, because obviously I haven't done it myself. I haven't done any course in creative writing apart from the 1 week ones. But I've heard some people say, yes, it's been absolutely fantastic. You know, I've got so much out of it. And other people who have said, it's completely put me off writing forever. So just be careful if you are going down that route. I think I've heard very mixed stories about it. I'm sure they do have a lot to give. And I would have thought that meeting other writers is always a good thing anyway, however you do it. I've also known somebody, I'll just say this, I've known somebody who has constructed their own course by buying writing books, set their own agenda and worked their way through it with a friend. And I think that's very valid as well, if you've got the self-discipline to do that. But you know, as Hilary points out, it's a craft. The main thing is that you just do it. And I think we all just learn by doing it. We've all got our own way of writing. We've all got our own processes. They're all completely different. So each person just has to work out their own way. I just say, keep experimenting, do whatever seems right for you, and just don't give up are the main things.
Also, editing other people's writing is a really good skill to develop, because it kind of gives you a snapshot into what works and what doesn't outside of your own immediate sphere. So if you ever have an opportunity to do that in a writing group, for example, it's brilliant, because it really sharpens your critical faculties, and then you start to immediately apply those learnings to yourself. So that's another benefit of joining a writing group.
And a lot of local communities have their own writing groups as well, which you can join free or very cheaply. So, you know, that's another way you could do it without having to enroll on an official course.
It's really good ideas, Erin. I like the inspiration, motivation behind, you know, whether to do or not to do a course, but also those words of warning as well, as ever. Do any of you have a literary agent as well as a publisher? And if so, could you talk a little bit about that, how that relationship works and how you get an agent?
I can say straight away I haven't got one. So over to the other two. I think fiction, you're more likely to need, I don't know, over to you two.
Yes, if you want to get published by one of the big publishers, you pretty much need an agent, because they don't accept submissions which aren't through agents. There are many other ways of getting published though. So there are a lot of small publishers that will accept submissions of and will publish novels and publish it very well without an agent. But if we're talking about agents, there's a bit of a process that you have to go through to get one. They are very, very busy people. So you need to follow their guidelines. They all have guidelines on the websites. You need to follow them to the letter, because they will be looking for an excuse not to take you on, because they already have books full of people and they don't really want anyone else. They select very few people. So follow their guidelines to the letter. They will normally ask for a synopsis of your novel, the first 3 chapters and a covering letter. So it's very important to get those as good as you possibly can, and spend, you know, sweat, blood and tears over getting those good. Your agent's job is to submit to the publishers, obviously, but also for your first book, they will help you with edits. So their job is to help you edit the first book, because that's the one that will sell you probably a 2-book deal and will get you into the whole writing world. So that's part of their job, as well as negotiating all the deals, dealing with the money side of it, which is so useful, because I just don't understand that at all. It's quite complicated, it's quite a minefield, and they will take all that off your shoulders. So they're really important. And any questions you have about the publishing industry, any things you're not sure about that you don't feel you can broach with your editor, you can go to your agent for those.
I would say that's great advice, and I would add that a good place to start when you're first submitting to agents and thinking about who you want to submit to might be to look at the authors that you admire, whose work you enjoy, and who you would place your writing beside. Try and find out who represents them, search around, make a list of names, and then you'll probably end up having to submit to quite a few of them, and maybe go through in order of preference which agents you want to approach. But I would similarly also say I've found it absolutely worth having an agent. So the industry standard for agents to take is about a 15% cut of your earnings, which might sound like a huge amount, but they're absolutely invaluable. So it's 100% worth it. They are your first editor. They are, your biggest champion. They already have their relationships with all of the publishers. They also often already have pre-negotiated contracts, kind of template contracts with certain publishers. They'll have people working in their agency often who are contract specialists. Sometimes they have film and TV and radio departments. They have relationships with literary scouts and sometimes co-agencies abroad for selling the manuscript in other territories. And then, they're your biggest champion all the way through. They'll sometimes be your publicist. They'll sometimes act as a kind of bad cop if you have any kind of problem with your editor. It allows you to have a bit of distance and not ruin your relationship with the editor. The agent can be the kind of go-between. And I think also the thing that I found really important is that if you find a good agent, they're going to care about your career in the long term, and they're probably going to become a really close friend as well. And I think that's really invaluable, because writing is such a solitary pursuit. It's quite nice to kind of have somebody that you're working with all the way through.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Absolutely agree with all of that. If you are looking for an agent, what you said about looking at your favourite books and seeing who represents them is a really, really good tip. And one way you can find out who represents them is look at the acknowledgements in the book, because nearly always every author will thank their agent in the acknowledgements. So just read the acknowledgements of your favourite books and then Google that agent, have a look at what their submission guidelines are. And at who else they're representing, and that will be a good starting point for you.
Thank you. Great advice. And you sort of alluded to this, Tess, but people imagine writers scribbling away in their room, unaffected by what's going on in the outside world, a little bit solitary, as you say. But obviously there's been a pandemic recently, and Tess, you already mentioned that your debut novel launched in the thick of that pandemic. How was that process affected by the pandemic? And then I'll ask Hazel and Hilary as well how their work's been affected by COVID.
I mean, it really affected it in almost every single kind of step of the process. So it was originally due to be published in April 2020, which was of course the absolute height of lockdown, and no bookshops were open then. So my editor decided to push back the publication date to August 2020 in hopes that bookshops would be open then. And thankfully they were, which was absolutely wonderful. But lots of other books have been pushed back to that summer as well. So I think there was a lot more competition, not just for the readers and the sales, but also for review space in newspapers and media coverage and shelf space. And generally in the pandemic, I think that book sales did go up, but that's not really the whole story. So I know that independent publishers suffered a bit more than the bigger ones, and kind of bricks and mortar shops suffered where Amazon could thrive. And I think similarly for authors, people who were kind of lesser known did miss out a bit, because when you're starting out as an author, you often reach new readers through appearances and libraries and booksellers in brick and mortar shops recommending your book to readers. And it was a real shame to not have those events. So I'd planned a launch party in April, and that had to be cancelled. And then even in August, we couldn't have a big event indoors. So yeah, there were lots and lots of obstacles. My publishers were working really hard to resolve these problems. I mean, obviously it was a really difficult situation for people generally, and for authors generally, but I felt really, really grateful that the book was pushed back to when shops had opened again, because I mean, in particular, my local bookshops were so supportive. But yeah, it was a little bit of a struggle.
I can imagine really sort of nerve-wracking, just sort of stop start the whole time.
Yeah.
Hilary and Hazel, how about yourselves?
Well, I had a double whammy out of this, because the thing that sustains me is my copywriting. And I was doing an awful lot of work in Southeast Asia at the time. And guess what? They were the first people to be hit by the coronavirus wave. And I thought that's really odd. And it's very interesting. I had this grandstand view of it all happening, all kind of gradually, relentlessly moving westwards without really knowing what I was seeing, you know, through all my conversations in the day with people from various countries in the Far East. Anyway, that was just the copywriting thing. But on the book front, it was quite good, actually, because I can't believe even now this happened, but we got into a bidding war with the most recent ghostwritten title that I've just done. And that soaked up an awful lot of, you know, certainly a year and a quarter of the 2 years that COVID was affecting us. So all of that was going on. That was all admin, basically, people kind of shouting and roaring, and it's beautiful. So I just sat back and watched it, and it's now being resolved as I sit here. So yeah, it wasn't too bad. So I just caught it in between, you know, didn't really affect me.
That's good. Yeah, it sort of worked both ways for me. So like Tess, I had lots and lots of book events lined up, all of which were promptly cancelled, which is kind of a bit heart-rending. Luckily, I already had one book published by the time all this happened, so I kind of had already got on that ladder. But my first book kind of had wasn't particularly successful. And I kind of did think, oh, well, maybe this is the end of my writing career. But then I had the very lucky thing of the Rich and Judy book club. And of course, that's run by W.H. Smith's now. So W.H. Smith stayed open whilst all the bookshops were shut, and my book was stocked in W.H. Smith's. So in fact, that really, really helped me, because people weren't seeing books on the shelves in other places, but they were going to Smith's, and my book was being dangled in front of them. So in that way, it helped sales enormously. So I'm just grateful every day for what happened with that, and to Rich and Judy. But sort of inspiration-wise, I think it has affected me a lot, because of not getting out and having those experiences, having that social life, because I do get inspired by meeting people a lot, and by the stories other people tell me, and observing things in life. And because all that has been so much less, I haven't felt so inspired in my actual writing. So yeah, it's a funny old mix. Yeah, it's affected me in all sorts of funny ways. Yeah.
It leads me into my next question, Hazel, in terms of sources of inspiration. Obviously, everyone has their own kind of writing process and sources of inspiration. But are there any tips that you would have for aspiring writers? I know you've given so many already, but what are your top tips?
Well, mine would be to write what you're really, really interested in and what you really love. You don't have to know a lot about it. Some people say write what you know, but I would say you might be very limited because you might not know very much, but you can always find things out. I mean, the internet now is just so easy to research. So write something that really fascinates you, because if you're writing a novel, you will be with it for such a long time. You'll have to go through it so many times. If you're not that interested in the first place, you'll be sick to tears of it by the end. So, you know, this will be something that you pour a huge amount of energy and life and emotion into. So you've got to be really passionate about it. So that would be my main thing. Write what you love, what you'd love to read yourself. Don't follow the markets, just follow your heart.
Yeah, I would say in terms of sources of inspiration, the number one thing for me is just really read widely and carefully and consciously. Try and work out what other authors have tried to achieve and how they've done that. I would say in terms of advice on writing process, write as often and as regularly as you can, even when you really don't want to and you feel like you can't. Just try and stick with it. And then when it comes to editing, I would say find readers you trust, whether that's a friend or someone in a local writing group or whoever. But I think it is really important to open up your work to criticism and to try and get the opinion of a reader coming to it fresh for the first time. And then I would say kind of most importantly, the piece of writing advice I would give is to try and let go of some of your stubbornness. You know, sometimes a sentence or a paragraph or even a character won't work, even when you desperately want them to. But then I would say always keep that kind of most stubborn belief that you have, which is that you should write and that you can write and that your writing is worth reading and worth pursuing. I think it's really important to hold on to that level of stubbornness, but maybe let go of the bad sentences.
Yeah, somebody called that, who was it who called that killing your darlings? I don't know who that originated from, but anyway, it's very difficult, especially as your confidence builds and you start to recognize a good piece of writing from a bad piece, or you come back to it the next morning, you look at it and go, blimey, who wrote that? And you realize, oh my God, it was me, and that one worked. And then seeing it maybe 2 days later and realizing you've got to take a chunk out of the middle, so hard to do, especially when it's a really carefully wrought sentence that just it really works on many levels, doesn't quite hang in there. It kind of interrupts the text in some ways. Very hard to kill it off, but you've got to be strong. But I would say, echoing Tess, read voraciously. Nothing informs good writing more than wide-ranging reading, because you learn so much from other authors. And then on practical level, at the risk of sounding really fuddy-duddy, but my God, I've been told this by so many editors, understand what good grammar is, because then you know when it's safe to break the rules. And that's, I just hadn't even, but I was quite surprised to hear that said more often than you would imagine. And also because then you become your own editor in a way, and you start submitting quite clean copy that will still need lots of editing, lots of reorganization, but it will essentially cut down on all the sub-editing function in-house. And they love that because it just wastes so much of their time. So those are two practical tips. Get a grip of good sound grammar, then you know when you can break the rules.
Thank you. We're going to move on to questions from the audience now. So if people have questions, if you can please write them in the chat, or feel free to speak them out verbally. Obviously, if we have lots of people, then it might be easier to do it in the chat, but we're more than happy to make this nice and interactive. So if I might give you sort of a minute or so to start. Oh, we got a raised hand. Excellent. Thank you very much. I love that. Lara.
Hello, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been super informative. My question is, I'm currently doing a PhD as well, this in musicology and composition. And so I sort of already have a public persona as a composer, and I've got a growing public persona as an academic. I've got a few articles that are in the process of getting published in academic journals, but it's still a dream to get published with my creative writing as well, which has currently been kept quite private. And I was wondering if you had any advice on combining those careers, both academic writing and creative writing, whether I should try and keep them separate, whether I should use a pen name. Because it is my intention to continue in academia after this, if I possibly can. And I was wondering whether the two worlds colliding would not be a recommended thing, or whether you think that wouldn't be a problem at all.
I suppose I have decided to not keep them totally separate. So in both my academic work and my creative writing, I kind of just do both under my name rather than using a pen name. I will say that kind of when you're selling your work, particularly if you're selling a novel for the first time, the publisher is always really interested in you and where your experience comes from and what makes you interesting as a person. Because although you really don't want to think of it in these terms, you as an author are going to be part of the kind of marketability of this product and reaching sales. So I think they would find your academic background really interesting. I'm not sure whether it directly informs your work or not, but either way, I think that it's something that makes you unique. And I don't think that it would necessarily be a problem to have all of your work under your same name. And in fact, it could be to your benefit, but it's just a personal decision, really. I don't know what you write. I mean, maybe you would write something that you think might completely destroy your academic credibility. I don't know. in which case maybe it would be better to use a pen name, but I assume it wouldn't be detrimental.
No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to a couple of raised hands first of all, and then we've got a few questions coming in through the chat. So I'll go to Beth next, and then Annie, and then we'll go to the chat. Sorry. So Beth, can you ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. It might be a bit general, but I suppose it's kind of just like confidence when you're getting started, particularly say like showing your writing to people if you haven't necessarily done that before, entering competitions, and then alongside that, kind of how to balance it with a degree, maybe if you're still in college, but primarily kind of getting that confidence when you're first getting started. Thank you.
Definitely agree with all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for me, the main thing really was finding just a couple of friends who enjoyed my writing and wanted to read it. I've had some friends who I've kind of mentioned that I've done writing before, and they've said they wanted to read it, and then they never actually read it and never got back to me with their thoughts on it, or maybe they didn't have time to. I decided I wouldn't keep sending the writing to those people, but I have just one or two friends who through my entire writing career have been the people that I send my writing to first, and for me that was always just such a huge thing in terms of building confidence, finding someone who you trust. It still is a huge leap in confidence to go from writing by yourself the very first time to sharing your work with someone else, but unfortunately you have to push yourself to do it, otherwise you're never going to be able to find any readers. And then in terms of balancing it with your academic work, I mean, it's always a struggle, really. And I think sometimes I have had to sacrifice, particularly when I was working on my novel, I had to sacrifice, meeting up with friends, or there was just one summer where I didn't really go on holiday and I just was working in the evenings, every evening on my fiction, and then working on my academic stuff to try and meet deadlines during the day. And it was absolutely exhausting. But I think you just have to try and find some way of carving out the time for yourself to keep at the writing, keep revising, even if it's just like half an hour, some mornings, even if it's, one afternoon where you just focus on it for a few hours. The main thing is just to keep doing it, keep practicing.
Thanks, Tess. A question from Annie. You've got your hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, with what you guys have been saying about kind of luck being a factor and entering loads of competitions, do you write a new piece every time you enter a competition? Or if the competition, like say one prompt is somewhat similar to another, did you send in the same piece of writing for multiple competitions, just because it's hard to almost conceive of keeping on entering competitions and every single time writing a new piece if you wanted to try and do it so much to almost beat the luck game?
Yeah, definitely. Maximize your chances all you can. I would definitely enter the same piece for many competitions. If it's one, I would obviously enter it for another one. But if assuming it didn't get anywhere, then, hone it, polish it, cut down for the word count if it's a different word count, or expand for the word count, and resubmit to another one by all means. That's absolutely fine. It's still your piece of work. It's still your writing. If it fits in with the competition's criteria, do it. Go for it.
I also do exactly the same thing. So the one thing you need to be careful about is simultaneous submissions. Sometimes in the fine print of competitions, they'll ask for you to not submit it to another competition until the judging period is over. So that's something to kind of read the T's and C's very carefully when you're submitting. But certainly if a story doesn't place in one competition, try and submit it to other ones. I find that writing to prompts sometimes can provide you with a lot of inspiration, and sometimes it just feels like you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it sometimes isn't worth it. So for me, I have always been a little bit more interested in just writing short stories myself that I'm interested in, and then seeing where I can try to place them, rather than trying to find a prompt and then write it. Although sometimes that can help you spark the very first bit of inspiration. But I certainly wouldn't keep writing new stories just for prompts all the time. I think that's a huge amount of energy you would spend.
Thank you. We'll go to the questions in the chat now. So what we'll try to do, because we've still got until 5:30, is to go through as many of the questions in the chat as we possibly can, and where we might come across some duplicates, we might kind of skip over you if we feel that you've already answered that type of question already, and then we'll try and pull out the important ones. But so bear with us while we try and get through, because there's lots of questions coming in, which is great. I'll kick off with the first couple, and then Mayha will take over with some questions. So we've got one here for Tess. How usual is it for an established author to pursue a creative writing master's? Relatedly, how many beginners make up your cohort?
It's a real mixture, actually. People come from completely different backgrounds and have completely different levels of expertise. There are other published authors who are on the course, and some people who have won competitions and things, and some people who have never really published anything in any form at all. So yeah, I would say it's not absolutely normal to do a creative writing course after publishing, but it's also not totally abnormal.
Thank you. Here's a question from Anna. Might be a good one for you, Hilary. Any advice for those who have lots of creative ideas that you'd love to get out there, but aren't particularly good at writing? Sorry, that wasn't because of you, it's because the ghostwriting bit's coming next. Sorry. Do I find a ghostwriter, a friend? Is there an idea generator in publishing houses?
Hang on a sec, let me understand that. So say it again.
So Anna, did you want to speak out your question?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to ask, so say you have a lot of ideas, quite a few, and they're creative and you don't see them out there, but you're a terrible writer, or maybe not terrible, but you're not very good at it. Is there anything that can be done? Like, do you get a ghostwriter? Do you find a friend? What is there a solution to this or not? And honesty is fine.
No, it has been done, honestly. It has been done. In fact, I'm trying to think who, my mind has gone blank, but there are novels that have been written by duos. Maybe Tess or Hazel will remember. I can't. There's one classic, I've forgotten it completely. No, the answer is it's perfectly possible to find a friend who can write really well, have brilliant ideas, and collaborate on it and produce a great, rollicking, fantastic story. Why not? Why not?
I mean, I would also add as well, if you're someone who has lots of creative ideas, there might be other kind of career pathways that you might be well suited to and that might appeal to you. I mean, whether that's working in publishing or maybe in kind of TV and film development. I mean, yes. Obviously those are people that need to have lots of ideas for stories. So there might be other routes that you would be interested in as well.
Yeah, because scriptwriters often work that way. It's always a collaborative process of sometimes 6 people sitting in a, not all of them are writing, but they're all throwing ideas around. So yeah, exciting.
I'm also curious to know whether you think you can't write, and if somebody told you that, or quite why you got this idea that you can't write, because maybe you can actually, and you're just not doing yourself any favors by telling yourself that you can't. Where did you get this idea from that you can't write? Because if you have the ideas, I really think that you are a long way ahead, because lots of people can write but don't have the ideas. So, tell me about yourself.
Hi, thanks for all the tips. What Hazel asked, nobody's really particularly told me that my writing wasn't that great. I just haven't done that much of it, except essays and politics, which is not related. I haven't done journalism, and I'm not the most patient of people, so I don't have that patience to sit with a novel for 1 year, I'm afraid. And yeah, that's my answer.
Okay. Yeah.
But thank you for your advice, really.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. We'll move on to some more questions. Mayha, did you pull out any questions to put to the panel?
Yes, thank you, Krista. There are quite a few interesting questions coming in. I'm just going to try and pull out the ones that I feel have not been addressed so far. So there's one from Millie. This is mostly directed at fiction, but have any of you considered self-publishing? And if so, what made you decide on traditional publishing?
I didn't consider self-publishing because I was quite lucky that I managed to find an agent fairly early on, and that would have been my first choice, just because I knew more about the world of traditional publishing than I did about self-publishing. I think I would have considered it if I'd written my whole novel, and if I put all that much energy, which I did, into it and time, I would have and had been rejected and had not gone down the traditional route, or had not been successful with that, I probably would have considered self-publishing, but I don't know an awful lot about it. But I know people who have had great success with it and would absolutely be in favour of it. I have nothing against it, and I have admiration for people who self-publish, absolutely.
I similarly haven't explored that route, because I also managed to find an agent quite early on. I think for me, one of the pulls of traditional publishing is working with people who are experts in their field, whether that's the editor or the art department. And I do know that sometimes with self-published works, there's a bit of a struggle to kind of actually get it on the shelves in bookshops. I think they do often do very, very well with online sales if they manage to find a way of kind of marketing it themselves, and manage to find their readership. But you can struggle to kind of get it into bookshops. So I think that's one thing to consider. But some people do manage it. I just personally don't have a huge amount of experience myself.
No, online's your best bet if you're going to go the self-publishing route, for sure. I mean, I've got a friend, Lisa Jackson, who does travel writing, very good, very funny. And she's done extremely well on Amazon. I mean, incredible, self-published. She's a very good writer. She was always a chief sub all her life, so she's pretty good. And very successful, gets a good living out of it. Yep. So it's not to be sneezed at, for sure.
Yeah, I'd say that the big advantage of self-publishing is that you have all the choices as well. So for me, I was very surprised at how little choice I had going down the traditional publishing route, that I didn't have any choice in my covers at all, or the titles. Things like that, you know, are all those choices are taken away from you, which is a bit sad, to be honest, because, you know, it's your book. But, you know, it's all decided by teams in London who don't really consult you about these things. So if you self-publish, you get to have all those choices. But as Tess pointed out, you do have to do the marketing yourself. And if you're not very good at marketing, the chances are you will not reach a very big readership. So you need to be good at marketing and be prepared to do a lot of it, I think, to reach readers that way.
Thank you. I think that was really well addressed. There's another one from Madeline. So she says, just wondering what you would call the very hallmarks of a well-written piece. What is absolutely vital to focus on plot-wise, character-wise, etc.?
Well, for me, it's characters all the way, because I'm a very character-orientated writer. I think I think all writers need to work very, very much on their characters, and dig really deeply into them, and really get to know them and spend time with them. Every little aspect of their lives is time well invested, I would say. Plots often grow out of characters as well, so just try in your mind putting them in lots of different situations and see how they react. Throw a lot of crises at them and see how they react, and quite often a plot will grow out of that. That's all I have to say about that one.
It's such a difficult question to answer, because I think also as a reader, I enjoy lots of different types of fiction. And I think in terms of good writing, I mean, sometimes I really enjoy writing that's very lyrical and detailed and rich. And sometimes I really enjoy writing that's incredibly concise and quite sparse and straightforward. I think the thing that I often look for as a reader is the atmosphere that a writer conjures, whether that's through their language or their kind of sense of place, or particularly the characters as well, and the voice. And that's a really kind of ephemeral thing. It's quite difficult to define what makes someone's voice. But I think as a writer, the way that you can find your voice and the way that you can work on improving your writing is really just by trying to consume as much of other people's writing as you can, and try and work out what it is that makes you love somebody else's writing. That I think is a great education in becoming a better writer.
Yeah, here.
Right. And then there is a question about publishing poetry, and how is it, if at all, different from publishing novels, short stories, non-fictions, in terms of agents, editors, and publishing houses? And also they want to know if it's maybe a better idea to get a foot in the door with prose and then switch to poetry, or the other way around.
I haven't ever written any poetry myself. I think there are some key differences. So I think it might be less likely for a poet to have an agent than a prose writer, because there's a bit less money to make. And agents often only really focus on where they can, earn their bread and butter. I think another key difference is that poets often start out by publishing chapbooks or pamphlets, and there are lots of independent publishers that work on those. So I think it's worth kind of looking around online and trying to work out where your work might be able to sit, where you want to submit it to. I don't think you necessarily should start out in one or the other. I think it just depends on what you enjoy writing. There are so many writers of prose that started out as poets, and vice versa. And I don't think any is necessarily a better route to becoming a writer, because you're going to learn so much either way. But certainly poetry is a very different beast when it comes to publishing. And unfortunately, I'm not an expert, so you'll maybe have to do some research online.
Great, thank you, Tess. There's another one from Sierra. Do you have any advice for people who want to write in multiple genres and for different age groups? Would you suggest looking specifically for agents who represent a more diverse range of authors? Would it be better to focus on one genre and then maybe later work on stories in other genres?
That's a really good question, actually. And the whole genre thing is something that I've struggled with a lot, because my very first novel doesn't really fit into a genre, and I don't really think any of my novels fit into a genre. And I have felt very much that people have tried to push me into a genre, and I've wanted to expand, and I've been advised by my publishers to stick to the genre in which I am successful, which is kind of being classed now as uplit and book club, but still doesn't really fit into crime or psychological suspense or any of the kind of classic genres that you have. But I think the industry is still very much geared to genre. And when you're starting out, that although there are some successful authors who have done different things in different genres, I think when you're starting out, you do tend to be advised to stick to a specific genre or a specific style, a type of writing, if you can. So I would advise you, for your very first novel, the first one you submit, be prepared to stick with that for a while at least, would be what I'd say.
I think particularly in the question of whether you're writing for children or adults, especially, and often you will get agents who only specialize in one of those areas. But I do know people who write for both adults and children, and actually they have different agents for both. So it is something you can kind of switch later on, but I would similarly agree that it's good to kind of try and make your name in one particular area when you're starting out.
Right.
Sorry, Mayha, were you going to ask another question? I was going to do the one for Hilary.
Yes, that's exactly the one I was going to ask. So.
See, great minds think alike. Shall I go for it? Just to point out, everybody, we are kind of picking and choosing questions from the list just so that we can get a really nice range, but we'll try and get back to those of you that we have missed if we have time. So to the question then, when it comes to getting into advertising copywriting, Hilary, do you have recommendations for how to build a strong portfolio without attending expensive portfolio schools? In my case, I have worked in-house in marketing for a few years, but samples from that time reflect house style more than anything.
Gosh, that sounds quite unfamiliar to me, actually. I have never created a portfolio for myself, for example. So I don't know if this is a recent thing that's expected of. Can you clarify who's the author of the question? Can they clarify what they mean?
PM, we don't have a name. Are you able to give us a little bit more information?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay. I'm so bad at Zoom on my phone, so I might get this all wrong. But yeah, well, what I've seen in different places is that if you want to get into ad agencies as a copywriter, you need quite a strong sort of website portfolio that you can show to sort of show the range of your writing, that you can meet different styles. And I suppose I wondered, it's probably a lazy question. The answer is probably just, write some stuff, do some fake ads for different. Anyway, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
No, because you are your own brand, so you've got to treat yourself. You are your own shop window. So having a website for yourself is a very good idea, to which you can refer people you know, want to get an idea of what you can do. So always a good idea to do that in the digital age. Writing fake copy is quite a difficult thing. You have to feel passionate about, you know, something quite like a brief, but you know, to get going on. But yeah, have a go at it. Or, you know, or use Instagram for it. Funny enough, you could make something work on that as well. I see. You know, you always think of it as being a visual medium, but you can work quite well for snippety, short, little kind of graphic pieces of copy as well that are arresting. So yeah, but I mean, you've got to get out to meet as many people as possible and try and get a shot at actually, you know, working for some of these agencies. You know, you get your foot in the door, get your name out there, and make them see you. And they, you know, if they think you're good and they can benefit from your skills, they will see you. You know, money talks at the end of the day. I don't know if that's in any way helpful. I've probably just confirmed everything you knew already.
No, it's really helpful. Thank you. And probably not hiding my name on Zoom meetings is a great start. So thank you very much.
Exactly, yes.
Thanks for your question. So we've got a question here from Renee. So just wondering how to take their writing to the next level. So Renee has submitted to a few magazines and got in, but doesn't quite know how to take it a step further. Does anybody have any thoughts on that one?
A step further, well, just keep going, keep doing the same, keep submitting, keep writing, I would say. We've already said the thing about competitions are quite a useful way in if you do have any luck with competitions, so try entering them for those. And again, I would just say, you know, it's really good if you get feedback from beta readers, called beta readers, just anybody who's willing to read your book and give you feedback. Family members can be good, but they can be a little bit too kind. So you need just to pick and choose carefully who's going to give you feedback. That's all I would say, really. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Tess or Hilary.
I mean, I'd also kind of say it depends in terms of next steps, what you want those next steps to be. I mean, if your goal is to try and publish a book, then I would really work on polishing either a collection of short stories, if that's what you do, or really try and come up with a draft of a novel, and then you can start approaching agents. But really, you can only start approaching agents in fiction when you have a full manuscript ready. So I would just spend a lot of time working on that if publishing a book is where you want to go next.
Thank you. You might actually just slightly sort of answered this question already. Juliana is asking, at what standard should your novel be before you begin to approach publishers?
I'd say the very best you can possibly make. I'm sorry, but don't, you know, if you've just written the first 3 chapters, no. If you've just written one draft, no, you need to go through it multiple times. This is where the grit and persistence comes in. You know, those are the qualities you need as a writer. You need to be prepared to go over it so many times, honestly, till you're quite sick of it, and then leave it for a long time, and then go back to it with fresh eyes, show it to people as much as you can. Just really keep nibbling away at it until you just cannot possibly make it any better, and then send it off. Sorry if that's...
I would entirely agree.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, repetition. But giving a good break between it, you know, that's the key thing, isn't it? Because you go back to it the very next day even, you'll still be word blind, and you've got to really leave it alone, go away, get a change of scenery, then come back to it weeks later.
Thank you. Brianna is also, I mean, sort of related to that, who's the first person professionally that you would send your novel to after completion?
I would say an agent. If you want to have an agent representing you, you'll want to kind of send it to them. If that's what the question was getting at, I'm not entirely sure. But I mean, for me, I would want my agent's opinion on something I'd just written, and that I felt was kind of fully ready. Or if you're just starting out, you'll be sending it to agents in the first instance.
Can I just add about the agents, that there are some writers' festivals where you can get to pay to meet agents one-to-one. usually quite expensive, but probably worth it if you have a manuscript that it really is ready to submit, because then you will submit a short section of it to them in advance, and they will look at it and they will have to give you feedback in that one-to-one, which is of course really, really useful, and you've got to meet them in person. So I did this at Winchester Writers' Festival. That's one of the Writers' Festivals that does that. Obviously, it's kind of only happened virtually over the last few years, but I think it's going to happen as a place again soon. And I think York Writers' Festival does that as well, but it's worth doing some research if you're serious about meeting agents. That's a good way in, because when they've met you personally as well, they're much more likely to remember you, and they have to give you a bit of feedback on what you've written.
Something else I've just remembered as well, another route to finding representation might be to enter competitions. So if you have even part of a novel or a full novel draft ready, there are various work in progress and first novel competitions like the Bath Novel Awards. And if you Google around, you'll find some of those online, and they often have agents acting as the judges. So you might end up finding representation that way. It could be something to explore if you feel like you've got a manuscript that's ready.
Thank you. I'm just double checking if we've been through all of the questions. Mayha, have we missed any?
I think that's it. There was one related to a master's in creative writing.
The best time to do it.
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead with that? I think we've addressed that.
Yeah, I think we've kind of touched on it already. We've got Rosie asking the best time to do a master's degree in creative writing. Is it more beneficial or even necessary to do it once you already have a finished novel or novels? I think we touched on it earlier.
I mean, I think people apply to creative masters, creative writing masters at different stages. Sometimes they just have a few short stories under their belt, and sometimes they have a novel that they're already working on. I think it's just worth kind of reading around online and researching different courses if that's something you're interested in. And some courses quite like you to come fresh out of your undergrad, and some really like you to have a bit of life experience. So yeah, just research around online, I would say.
I have to say, I do think life experience helps with writing novels. I think that, you know, if I'd gone into writing novels straight from when I was a student, I wouldn't really have written as well. You know, I was good at writing sentences and everything, but I just didn't have the experiences to put in there. So, you know, equally valid might be just to go and have lots of experiences rather than just enroll on a course. I don't know, it's just another idea, depending on what sort of person you are.
Great.
I think one last question from Lara. Do you want to go for that, Mayha?
Yeah, I was just saying that's a really good closing question, isn't it? Key mistakes you think aspiring writers make?
What?
What are the key mistakes that you think writers and novelists make?
Submitting too soon, I would say, is one that nearly everyone makes, that they submit before their manuscript is ready because they are hungry for publication. And that's the worst thing you can do, because then you'll just get rejected and you'll get put off. You need to just be ready, as we said, you know, you need to work really, really hard on it and make it incredibly good before you submit. So that would be the first thing that people mistake a lot, I would say. What else?
I would say giving up. I mean, I think it's just so easy to give up and throw in the towel. And for me, I just think there were so many points at which I felt like doing that, and I'm really glad that I didn't and that I kept at it. There were times when I stopped writing for a bit and then came back to it. But I think the main thing, if you want to be a writer, you're going to have a bit of grit, and you're going to have to really, really keep at it. Yeah,
persistence. Yeah, and also finding the right agent. I think for both Hazel and Tess with fiction, you know, if you get an agent who's going to fight for you, that's half the battle, isn't it?
Thank you. Anna Maria, who's doing the MST Creative Writing here at Cambridge, has said that their course organisers do believe that the more life experience you have, the better. So just backing up what you've said, I just want to say a huge thank you to our panellists today, who have just been fantastic, inspirational, fantastic perspectives and advice. Thank you so much. We've had lots of thanks in the chat for you all, which hopefully you'll be able to switch on your chat in a minute to have a look and see that. But it's been a fantastic afternoon. Thank you so much for your time. And it's been wonderful hearing about your passion and your careers.